I wanted to say, my grandma was born in March of 1939. And I did another video on this podcast before. I did it back on April 27th, I believe. And that episode was all about Sun conjunct Saturn in synastry. And one of the things to note about the synastry between our charts is that my sun at 16 degrees, 40-some minutes of Aries, makes an exact conjunction. And I say exact. I don't say it lightly. An exact conjunction, just minutes away from being exact, same degree, having her Saturn in Aries. I'm not going to get into the astrology of this. I discussed it on that, that other video. But I'm just going to say that there's always been this thing around some insecurity, some limiting beliefs around self and putting yourself first. All the stuff about self-love, all this stuff. There have been times when she has called it selfishness. And, the truth is, it isn't selfish. Putting yourself first is not a selfish thing. It is essential to do this. It is essential to, A, fill up your own cup and take care of yourself so that you can serve others with, fulfillment. And, it is essential that we take care of ourselves, that we put ourselves first in our own lives, that we respect ourselves, that we don't sacrifice ourselves for others. And we all have soul desires. And I think that in the new Aquarius age of Aquarius, we can all fully respect each other's desires to follow our own soul calling. It's not based off of ego or arrogance or pride. It's based off of what your heart wants. And, we all have desires, needs, and wants. And in the age of Aquarius, not the age of Pisces, which we came out of, where, the age of Pisces was an age where all these religions, instead of heart, connection, forgiveness, compassion, oneness with all that is, really, you had to sacrifice yourself, and you couldn't stand out and be very, very, individualistic about, your own spiritual belief system. Now, it's sort of whatever you want to believe in, whatever you subscribe to, it's open. And, for anyone to have their own form of spirituality. And in the age of Aquarius, we all have individual needs, wants, and desires, and it is up to us to live our own lives authentically. And if that authenticity means I want to serve others from a place of genuine heart and genuine love and authentically wanting to serve, I have no problem with that. I think that it's beautiful. Beautiful. But if you're doing it in a way where you're depleting yourself, sacrificing yourself, where you are just going along with the status quo and not choosing to put yourself first in your own life and do what is right for you on a soul level, well, that is going to be that's going to be, it's your life. It is your life. So live the life according to what you want. You will have one life. So make the most of it. Each of us are entitled to live, we're fully deserving of living out the lives that we want to live, that our soul wants to live. And I don't say that lightly. When I say that, why should you go along with what others want and give up your own identity and desires for others? And, actually, you serve others by being yourself. That's a new coming belief that I've probably talked about before. I know I have, and I'll continue to talk about it as we progress further into the Aquarian age, which I believe officially started last year, that, you could talk about disappointment. You could talk about not letting others be disappointed by you and others judging you, holding you back. As long as you're doing what brings you joy, what brings you fulfillment, what makes you happy, that's the most important thing. Because if you do that, then you will be able to have better relationships with other people, serve others better, be there for others, be more empathetic, be more, do good for others if you put yourself first. That is a fact. We live in 2026. We do not live in 1939 anymore. The world has changed drastically over the past 87 years. And what I want to say is that life now is very, very different than how it was back then. Because back then, the people born were known as being members of the silent generation. Imagine a whole generation of people brought up by war, poverty, all this stuff, political, or not, I was reading police brutality, all this stuff. To survive, they had to keep quiet. They had to be tough and strong and resilient and not speaking out. And they, it's typical for them to stay in the same job for 28 years because there is a fear of instability, a fear of just following your soul's calling, letting an old version of you die away in order for you to be reborn. Because in March of 1939, the North Node was in Scorpio. And Scorpio is about being willing to let go of a version of you that no longer is true to who you are, and being willing to change and let go of the need for rigidity and stability and, material safety, where you feel like, wow, on a deep soul level, I am holding myself back. Everyone is worthy of their own growth. In 1939 and now, everyone is still worthy. Yet at the time, we weren't given the opportunity to really live out that real authentic life. So, I titled this video, Conformity and Survival. I use those words in the title because, I'm going to talk about a lot of this stuff as I go through, talking about the silent generation. And just the name itself sounds really, really melancholy, doesn't it? Very disempowering. Let's just talk about empowerment for a second. Not given a whole lot of opportunities to empower themselves. I wouldn't say that there's all bad things about this generation, but it is outdated. And some of those beliefs and mindsets are strongly outdated to today. And I'm going to get into some information here about this generation because I talk on my channel a lot about what it means to be in your soul. Love yourself, put yourself first. I talk about self-awareness a lot. I talk about authenticity a lot, spirituality a lot. And so, it could be that there is some discomfort and some limiting beliefs around what it means to put yourself first, and you're seeing somebody like me going out and just freely living it, and you're like, how come you can do that? And I was taught that I can't have what I want, that I can't do this. That's not fair. So at every opportunity that I find, that I hear something I disagree with, I'm going to judge you, and I am going to test you with what I was taught, all the projecting limiting beliefs and limiting lessons onto you. Not to take you down, but because this is how I think. And you know what? I don't like it. And I will say that suppression of identity, that not being allowed to be yourself, creates the very shadow of selfishness. Because then you become very egoic. When you're not fully allowed to be yourself, then it's easy for you to become dominating and egoic. When you're not allowed to be yourself and be who you truly are, then narcissism can come about. All those kind of things. And the shadow side of self-identity comes into play. And then you don't take life so seriously. You think of life as a grand game and a grand act instead of a spiritual experience, because we are human beings second, spiritual beings first. Life is not a movie or a play. It is, we are incarnated to live out a spiritual life. Not that we have to play certain rules of the game. Otherwise, we're going to be hurt. We're not going to survive as easily. No. Life is not that kind of game and that kind of drama. We are connected with the divine, and we are divine beings in human form. We are meant to co-create our lives with a partnership with spirit. We are not meant to be subservient to what others want. Well, at least not anymore. Because I'm going to get into some things, and it really, really makes me sad. This particular generation does make me sad. I'm going to delve in here. So let's just start out. I've had enough introductory stuff. That was a long introduction. Let's get started. So when was this generation? So it was, I'm going to give you the dates. 1928 to 1945. So basically, the beginning, a year before the Great Depression started, to literally the end of World War II. And 11 years later, from 1928, my grandma was born. At the end of the Great Depression, beginning of World War II, kind of the, what it was just starting. Very, very young, barely could remember anything going on. I think, I don't know. But the previous generation was known as the greatest generation that served in World War I. And yes, I talk about astrology. This channel is devoted to astrology. Yet there were some other factors that contribute to a person. And it could have to do with the astrology going on. I'm not going to delve into all the intricacies of what that was like, but, the previous generation grew up in the 1920s. And life, that was the roaring 20s. Remember all the great inventions that came out. People were really living the life. Going out on the town. New technology was coming out. People were riding in cars. Everything was glamorous and nice. And you wish it would have continued into the 1930s, but then life drastically changed because in October of 1929, the stock market crashed. And then everything became very, very run down and very, very poor in the 1930s. And that was the Great Depression era. That was the Great Depression. And, in the Great Depression, things were drastically polar opposite from the 1920s. Think about, and Chiron was Taurus between 1926 to 1934, and I talked about the Chiron and Taurus. Chiron's actually right now in the sign of Taurus as I'm doing this. So, but in the Great Depression, for those born, grew up during the Great Depression, for instance, they grew up with the scarcity mentality, the scarcity mindset of having to save everything, that life was precious, that resources were precious, of having to hold everything so tightly, of not feeling safe, of not feeling secure, and having to survive, and having to, get sustenance, and get food, and get, be able to, get through the next day, and get through the next meal. And, because people were poor, and, food was expensive compared to people's, paycheck at the time. And so that was very, very tumultuous. And I think that if you understand what was going on around this time in history, then you can have a greater sense of understanding and compassion for the people who were born during this particular generation. So life was not that glamorous and that flashy and that easy in the 1930s. Jobs were uncertain. Banks held the money, didn't easily distribute it. And, food was scarce. And so they learn to be resilient. They kind of, and they didn't just come in as souls living this experience, because remember, they were growing up at this time. They were influenced by their parents and by the world around them. And their parents probably fought about some of these issues, and that probably came up in their fighting, like about jobs and about money and about food and about all this kind of thing. And they observed that and deeply internalized these messages and learned that you had to not need more than you needed, the bare minimum. Life is tough. Hold on to what you have. Save everything you have. Sometimes they even save things that, like, you never know you're going to need this later, instead of, and that's a Taurus South Node thing, of like hoarding possessions and hoarding things and not letting things go to make space for new energy, to make space for new things. Having this mountain of material. And, this isn't like my grandma. A lot of Pisces in the natal chart, flowing, very, very adaptable energy with that Scorpio North Node. So there are a lot of exceptions. And you do have to look at the individual person. You can't just put the person in a category along with the generation. However, I will say that, they learned that life, you had to survive and be strong and be tough. And I'm going to get into some stuff here. I'm just going to say that emotions were invalidated. If you came to your parent at that time with emotions, and you just you're not strong enough, toughen up, being gaslit and invalidated for their emotions, and not being allowed to fully feel and talk about them and do all this, of which I'll get into later. I'm just kind of hinting you that a case, I don't have it here. But the greatest generation came before them, and born around the time of World War I. After the silent generation came the baby boomers, which I do believe was from 1946 to potentially the end of the 1950s. So that was the whole period. So, there was a huge, and baby boomers, a lot of them, like a lot of new babies started to be born. Birth was really, really huge. Birth rates, skyrocketed. And, and it was a small generation. There weren't many people in this generation. So I'm going to get into some more stuff as I go through. So, groups that are made over time is, really, really huge. The generations get, created by the public, by people in the public domain, over time, largely after the generation is over. We can't categorize what the generation was about in the categories of it, what it's about, until after, when we understand the picture and the framework better. Then we can accurately give definition and give meaning toward the generation. So, generations do overlap. For example, maybe I'll do a video on the millennials also. Yeah, I did plan on that like back in April, and I just didn't get around to it. But if I'm doing this, then I might be interested to do the other generations. Gen Z, I'm of the Gen Z generation, and the previous generation was the millennials. A lot of overlap. And those generations really, really woke up to all the problems going on in society in previous generations. And we as Gen Zers don't want to conform and do not want to follow authority. There is a problem with authority, and it's largely about authenticity, being who you are, and I think that those are beautiful qualities. Maybe there was some enmeshment with this generation, having to, loss of identity, not having your identity squashed out of you, your own truth squashed out of you, having to conform to what other people want. And I will throw in that people just, I guess, did good at the time, put others before themselves, like some Christian virtues and some very, very disempowering Christian virtues. And that was a really, really huge trait. Oh, if only everybody acted like that, and there weren't bad, terrible dictators going on in the world at the time. But if only people were allowed to follow their soul's plan for their lives. But that wasn't how the world was at the time, and let's just acknowledge that. Let's just be honest about that. So, very, very different now, and we can breathe a major sigh of relief that the world has drastically changed since then, and we are all allowed to fully be more ourselves at this time. Oh, thank goodness. Thank goodness, thank goodness. I am on social media, and I'm saying all this, and I am allowed to say this, and social media exists where we can all express ourselves and do all of that. I just want to say what a privilege it is. What a privilege it is. Let's just give thanks for that. Let's just acknowledge that right here and now. So, the generations overlap. From one generation to the next, there are some similarities, and then there could be stereotypes. Like the generations are given stereotypes for being a certain race. Yeah, it's really, really important to understand what certain generations were like, so that if you see a group of people or somebody from that generation, then if you're working with them and relating to them, then you understand. And it would have been very, very helpful to understand understanding, and I think that talking to your grandmother, talking to what life was like at the time, being able to understand the story of what it was like growing up at the time, the generation was like, and how that impacted them as adults. I think that is hugely important, and I wish that I had this understanding earlier. Now, I'm not going to say here that my grandma falls into the stereotypical category of this. I think that there are a lot of exceptions to who she is as an individual. But, I was talking about authenticity earlier, and I think that plays a role. So, anyway, now this generation was silent for a reason. They were silent about a lot of taboo things, a lot of issues going on in society. They weren't given the freedom to assert themselves in Aries theme. Remember, Saturn in Aries, conjunct my Sun in Aries. Difficult. Not being allowed to speak out against hardly anything. Things were mentioned in sort of, silent, subtle, very, very subtle exchanges of information. They kept quiet. They can just sit in a room and be totally silent. Hence their name. So they didn't speak out against hardly anything. Well, they learned that it was dangerous to speak out. They learned that it was dangerous to be honest and be truthful and be transparent and voice their own truth about what the issues going on. I mean, imagine if you grew up that way and you lived that life. Well, that makes me so sad. They kept silent just to. Here's the thing. The Libra shadow. Libra shadow creates the Aries shadow. Because if you're not given the freedom to be yourself, things are going to stir up inside of you, and you're going to become angrier and angrier and angrier, and then boom, you're going to burst out in anger, because eventually the pot's going to boil over. Nip it in the bud. Allow yourself the freedom to express your own truth right now in diplomatic, assertive, right-minded ways, instead of just exploding and reacting and doing all this, and, erupting in anger and not letting your emotions just get the better of you. So, they kept silent just for the sake of peace, just for the sake of harmony, just to keep their peace, to maintain their status, to survive. They kept quiet just to survive. Because they were taught, you can't speak out, it's dangerous to. Just toughen up. And they're very, very enduring, yes. They can endure a lot of things that, we would really, really be amazed at that they endured, and their just mindset is just so resilient, and, they were troopers in the life that they grew up in. Very, very strong, heavy troopers. But, but this is not the point that I'm trying to say. I'm not going to, this video is not an award for how resilient they are and how they are. This is, largely what's negative about them. This is the title, What's Wrong with the Silent Generation? Because this is, I will say that this video is more geared towards the negative side. So, if you want a more positive interpretation, then maybe this video isn't the one to be listening to. All for the sake of survival. Because of having to survive, of having to, of having to be very, very strong, be very, very resilient, this and that. So, so any big issue, mental health, that person's a little bit funny now. Instead of, I just want to understand what's going on with you so that I can help you. And when Pluto entered Scorpio, all these terms about mental health disorders or mental health issues and the more, and psychology and relationship stuff, and the Oprah show came on at the time. Like, Oprah Winfrey got really, really popular at that time. So I would say the 1980s, 1990s. But before then, mental health was really, really, I don't even want to say put on the back burner. It was ignored. It was almost, non-existent. And to be able to have deep, loving and nurturing emotional connections with family members, sadly, was, I'm going to say it, non-existent. Almost non-existent. Wow. Just wow. What they went through with being working hard, don't be a, and I'm not going to even use the word because I don't want to be using that word in my videos. I will say that it is the word that was heavily used in the Karate Kid. I'm not going to even say it because it's just so taboo. I don't want to even go there. But what I will say is I will use the word, not being a crybaby. You're a wimp if you feel all these feelings that and and conversely, if somebody's sun was conjunct my Saturn, I don't think I would be that harsh with what I would say to them. Maybe I would look at how much they feel and how much they receive so easily, and it's like, how can you receive and get all this love and care and feel so safe and nurtured, and I don't feel that way, and I feel this block and feel this limitation when it comes to actually feeling. Like, that's not fair. And so, with all the lessons, all my insecurities, I'm going to just teach you all these insecurities. I'm just project all these insecurities. And that isn't, I'm going to say it, some self-awareness has to be brought around that. And the thing about self-awareness is others come second in self-awareness. Self-awareness, right? Because if you if you're self-aware and you're authentic, then you impact others in a positive way. And you can be self-aware of when you're in your ego, when you're operating from that place. Like, that needs self-awareness, self-understanding, self-analysis. So, that is the point that I want to understand about that. So, don't preach anything dealing with self-awareness to me, because, don't be top down with me about these types of things, because I will, you'll hear my truth come out, and you'll hear it come out of me. So yeah. So, anyway. So, not having a whole lot of conversation about this stuff. Now, moving on. Serious issues were just too intimidating and too frightening to talk about. People were afraid to talk about this stuff. People were timid when it was to talk about all this stuff. And people kept quiet about these issues. These issues were under lock and key. People didn't talk heavily about these issues at all. It's best to just be quiet about it. Best to be silent about it, not best to, if you were to rebel and be the change you want to see it, and make a change and do things differently, well, that was frowned upon and rejected. Yeah, yeah, I know it's sad. I know it was very, very sad, and I know that the people who are watching this that really, really believe in all the things that I stand for on my channel will really, really frown at that. So, around that truth, but I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. I'm not going to lie to you about this time. It was rough, and that's the whole point of what I'm trying to talk about in this video. So, so many things went wrong at that time. I mean, there's so much going on in the world that was just so negative. And the problem is feeling so disempowered. Like, these people grew up really, really disempowered. Like, they couldn't empower themselves to do, and I want to empower you with all my videos, with all my content, to be who you are. Like, I seek to empower others, and as my way of service toward others, I want to empower you to be yourself. Like, that's my contribution with all that I do, with my astrology, with my, Real Me podcast. Like, I want to do that. So, but it was not easy to be empowered at this time. Because in a world full of chaos and war and poverty and all this stuff, there's so little that you could do about it. You're just having to be subservient to a lot of things. Having to just adjust and adapt. Adapt is not a Taurus North Node word. Adapt is more of a Scorpio Pisces word. And that's another lesson that has come across in our relationship, is that, adapt. And I'm not going to say, being flexible is a negative lesson. It's very, very positive. And we all need to understand that, because the universe works in mysterious ways, God works in mysterious ways, so, life is going to happen a certain way. So, yes, there is absolute validity to that, but coping mechanisms, they developed all these coping mechanisms. And before, I even go any further, I want to recommend a resource to you. Teal Swan really is very knowledgeable about these generational wounds. So if you want to have a deeper understanding of this, you can really go to her for a lot of these things. Not that there's not a whole lot of information in this episode, but you can really go to her for a lot. So, so little that you could change about the world. Keep your chin up and just carry on and, be resilient and all that kind of thing. They just know how to do the Mars and Libra thing of just holding their emotions and holding their true feelings and just are masters of that. And I'm going to say it very, very bluntly, masters of inauthenticity. Masters of inauthenticity. Yep. So, okay, so factors that could influence a generation could indicate family, your age, your gender, your race, your socioeconomic class in society, your role in society, your job, your religion, largely Christian at the time, and your place of living, your location, and the mental health, with the psychology of the generation. And I want to uncover that here in this episode. So things were a lot less diverse. There's not a whole lot of diversity in this generation. A lot of them were white Americans. Now, a lot of the LGBTQ plus, or IA, I believe it is, that was squashed. That was frowned upon. That was looked at as a negative thing. Like, you couldn't have same-sex marriage. And maybe the more dated old-timer, stuck in the past sort of people of this generation could view gay, lesbian, transgender, all these things being very, very, queer, all that, being an issue for society. Of course, I don't believe that at all. I think that everyone is worthy to be in relationship with who they want to be in relationship with and who is true to be in relationship with, in their own lives. So, this whole identification and relationships was a bad thing for society. That was the zeitgeist that was going on at the time, certainly. Now, they could have brought the rise of higher education, but they did have less, the term is household wealth that decreased over time. There were a small generation of people, the generation before and after. The greatest generation, the baby boomers. Now, war and equality was going on at the time, as I've already mentioned in this episode. War and equality was transpiring. It was, an issue at the time. And so, at the time, people were, really, really poor. They were really, really poor with the Great Depression. It was very, very difficult to get a job. I've already sort of spoke about the Great Depression going on right here and now. So, this is all transpiring. This is all what it is all about. And so, just surrounded by war. Imagine living in war. You had to, survive and there's all this chaos going on around the world, really creates, you're in survival mode. And their mental health and well-being, nope, completely ignored. They were denied and invalidated for their feelings. They couldn't talk about their feelings in healthy ways. They couldn't have conversations. There wasn't therapy where you could just talk to a therapist about what was going on with you psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, even. That wasn't. I don't even think that was a thing at the time. Where you just taught to, just be tough, be strong, carry on. Life is not fair. Adjust. You'll get through it. You could argue, well, that was a very, very battling, strengthening thing, but oh no, it didn't acknowledge the more, like vulnerability, like not being fully allowed to be vulnerable, not being allowed to be, just who you are, and, vulnerability, and really, really allowed to feel your emotions, and really, really allowed to talk about them, openly. Vulnerability was not seen as something strong at the time. And now, it truly is a strength. It truly is a strength. It says a lot about who you are in terms of your character when you are being humble and honest about what you are feeling, and you're opening yourself up about that, and you're not limited by judgment and whatever. It is a beautiful thing, and now I think that in this day and age, we are recognizing that. Okay. So, this is the past. This is all, ghostlands and shadows of the past. This is all the old relics from the past. So that's what we have to really, really bear in mind. They were taught that in order for something to be, this is a Capricorn South Node shadow, get ready. In order for something to matter and be important, it had to be a struggle. It had to be difficult. You had to really, really struggle for this. You had to really, really work hard and suffer through this. And the huge thing is sacrifice. Having to sacrifice who you are and what you want, your own soul desires, your own needs, wants, and desires, what you wanted, just for others, just for something bigger than yourself. Sacrificing your own peace of mind, your own peace, your own, your own, your own authenticity for others. Getting taught about, the kind of sacrifice that you give up, all these things. Give up who you are for somebody else. Like, no. Absolutely, no. I'm gonna say, I'm not only gonna say no, but hell no. Hell no. No. Nope. Absolutely disapproving of that. Indeed. I mean, don't even get me started about that. So, let me think. What was I gonna say here? So, what was I gonna say about sacrifice? I forgot what I was gonna say. I had a train of thought, but it left me with that. But, having to, give up who you were. And, I remember what I was going to say now. It's maybe common for people of that generation just to have said to their children, when they talked about emotional problem, they invalidated potentially by saying, oh, I struggled this hard, I did this and all that. Well, like, okay, that's terrible, and let's hold space for that, but you need to hold space for what the child is coming to you. You need to not project your own experience. And guess what? You're not living that life anymore. So move on and be present for what your child is saying, and be open-hearted and open-minded toward what they're saying. Hold space for it and help them out through that. Don't, it's very, very important to not, project and invalidate people's experiences, but to be somebody that they can turn you to, that is loving, that is kind, that is caring, that you're genuinely from your heart, opening up to what they're saying, and there's nothing wrong with it. That's beautiful, and we need love and compassion in the world, and there wasn't a whole lot of love and compassion in the world going on at that time. So, they were taught that if they had a mental illness, there was something deeply wrong with them. There was something deeply flawed about them, that they were a bad person, a wrong person, someone who just, but now, in this day and age, we look at that and go, okay, I see this as an issue. I acknowledge this as an issue. Let me see if I can get you help with this. Let me see what I can do to help you, because I care about you. I love you. So, let me help you with this. And, because, needing help, needing, having loving, having love and compassion for this person's mental illness, like that wasn't, acknowledged. I just want to say, there's a difference between, sacrificing for somebody else versus being kind and loving to them. It's not ego, it's heart and soul. It's really what feels right. And a lot of times what feels natural and right is to do things for somebody else, but only if we take care of ourselves. Again, going back to what I was saying. So I just had to acknowledge that, because that limiting belief was coming up in my mind as I was saying that. I don't know what that was. That was a phone call that just came on now. Okay, so alrighty. So now we look at that and go, we want to help the person. We want help, love. We want to give help and love and compassion towards that person who has a mental illness, and we're diagnosing it, we're treating it, we're helping you work through it. Like, that is our day and age. And most people who will be sitting through this will be like, great, that's a sigh of relief. Thank goodness. Let's keep that on going. Now, all the after effects from all this war and all this poverty and all this stuff, continue to play a role after the time period was over, because all these beliefs about mental health stayed in place for them. They had PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, because they went through trauma from the war and from all these things, constantly living out the repercussions and the after effects of what was going on at the time. So, silent generation members went through war or another kind of trauma. They experienced PTSD, but sadly, they couldn't get a diagnosis and treatment for it at the time. They may be suffering as a result of maybe valued people in their life dying. Of course, they're at older age, so a lot of the people in their lives have passed away. And deep down, a lot of them struggle with, and I'm not going to say that, my grandma struggles with this, because I don't want to make this assumption, but a lot of them struggle with finding meaningful things in their lives after they retire, as I was reading. Harder to settle down and find, a lot of things, because, losing the stability of their job and losing all these stable structures, and I would say they're very, very uncomfortable with change and with adapting to change, about trusting the universe, about letting go of these stable structures, because, I'm afraid that I'm not going to survive this easily. I'm not going to have the stability of this. So, I should have put my phone on silent before doing this. In fact, I may do this if I can find, I don't know where it is. Anyway, happened. We'll see what I can do with that to prevent somebody calling me in the middle of a podcast episode. Okay. So, alrighty. So, they may struggle with aging, loss of certain abilities, mental health, because that's kind of the process that happens as you age. You get less, smart, your mind is less sharp. Let's see how I am during that time. Hopefully my internal gut and system will be high functioning at the time. I think that with all the new inventions and technology coming out, Uranus will have moved through Virgo by the time I get to that age. So there'll probably be a lot of health stuff coming out to help with your mind and stuff like that, but sometimes you can't prevent that. But there'll be a lot of, remedies and medications and stuff, I bet, by the time I get to be of that age. But I'll probably still be on here doing this. There's a lot of struggle with this, aging going on. So, what we need to do is hold space with this generation. And again, going back to understanding them with all they went through, thinking about they think about the preciousness of life and making the most out of our current experience. Really, really making the most out of life and living the most fulfilling life we can, because we only have one life, and so you might as well make it authentic to you. There was a song that I was listening to by Barbra Streisand, and it triggered some limiting beliefs inside of me. And the song was, if you make someone happy, you'll be happy as well. And, well, I think that there's a little bit more specificity having to be made around that lyric. And on some levels that is true, but that depends. Do you feel filled up? Are you doing it from your heart? Do you really mean it? Or are you just doing it just to please the other? And in your soul, you really don't want to. So you have to look at that. Barbra Streisand is somebody born during the silent generation also. So I thought I might just throw that in there. And I listened to her music. I've listened to her Walls album. It's my favorite album that she has created. Beautiful voice, really, really rich voice. My grandma is a real, real big fan of Barbra Streisand, so we have similar tastes in music. So, that's good. I'm not into the modern rock, some type of pop, music that exists. It's really, really common out in the world right now. No, I'm not a fan of that. It's not my cup of tea. So, some of the more low frequency music going on in this day and age. Whereas classical music can be more high frequency, high vibration. So, alrighty. So, you know, it's your life, so you should live it according to what you want in your own life. So making the most of your current experience. Now, they may known to conform. They were taught to conform, to just follow the rules, just follow along, do what they're expected to do, follow in line. And I read that they were taught better to be seen and not heard. Wow, sad, I know. But hardworking. Very, they were very, very hardworking people. They learned resilience. They're very, very resilient. They're very, very, the positive side is they're patient, they're resilient, they can endure through really, really difficult things. They can endure through all the challenges that life gives them very, very easily. But this also creates that with their coping mechanism is to endure, to be resilient. That's how they coped with all this turmoil going on in the world. And can members of the silent generation heal from all this stuff? And, you can heal the wounds of the silent generation. And the wound is inauthenticity. I want to name that the wound of this generation is the wound of authenticity. So war shapes the personality. You need to survive all the kind of thing. So after this generation, and later on in the 1950s, in the boomer generation, there were greater equality between races because of the civil rights movement. So then people started rising up, activating, speaking about all these issues going on, all these issues with society, and racism got looked at and healed and resolved in a way, with thank goodness that we have more equality between blacks and whites. Thank goodness that they are equal, and I don't have any discrimination towards either race in my life, and I strongly believe that the person's skin shouldn't define who they are as a person. Like that's it's the gold standard. That is the common belief nowadays, and thank goodness it is. So and if you want to understand more about the civil rights movement, I actually have another episode where I talk about Martin Luther King Jr. I did that back in March of 2026. It's an earlier episode. I actually did an episode on him. And if you want to check that out, you can go all the way back there, check that episode out. I did that a long time ago, many, many months ago, several months ago. So anyway, personalities can be based on experiences that you had when you were young, maybe, but personality traits could change over time based off of the different changes of the world, and how you grow, how you evolve spiritually. Mentally, emotionally, and I will argue that this generation was not the most spiritually mature generation because of the inauthenticity, sacrifice, doing things for others, doing all of that. And you may think that is like mature, but sacrificing your own soul desires and what you want, and loving yourself and do all of that, like not loving yourself and putting up with things that you don't deserve to be in, and people pleasing, well, that is immaturity. That is a sign that you're still needing to mature as a person. If you allow yourself to be pulled in by the situations and put up with those situations, there is some work and some growth to do. And I say that in a compassionate, loving way, but in an honest, direct way. Because we have matured over time. And I would say that the new generations coming in are very, very much are more mature spiritually. And I'm not saying that hard work and discipline isn't mature. I think it's a very, very disciplined thing, actually. But as I said in that August video, the astrology for August 2026 is actually, what are you directing it towards? Like, how is it? What is it directed towards? What are you working on? Sacrificing, struggle, people pleasing, or is it what you want, what's true for you? So that's what I want to throw in there. But so the other thing is, don't take one particular person and deem them as bad and wrong just because they came from the silent generation. I mean, my grandma and my grandpa was born in 1936. He passed away 2 years ago. But my grandma is a very, very kind, loving person, very, very good person. Pisces sun, 3 planets in Pisces, a lot of that going on. Very, very kind. Wanting to be there for the other, and all that kind of thing. Hopefully from a place of genuine wanting to be there. And I trust that it is that. But like, there could be worse people in the world when it comes to this, and I think that she falls totally on the totally short end of the stick and the really, really bad side of the spectrum. I'd say middle to getting better. I would say that's where she would fall, like really, really towards the more like the healed, better, not quite there, but just there enough and quite progressed along the pathway. Growing in terms of, it's okay to love yourself, it's okay to put yourself first, it's okay to go after your own desires, and all that kind of thing. Maybe light years ahead of where she was many, many years ago. And the world is light years ahead of where it was back, what was going on in 1939. So, so don't, put somebody down just because they came from the silent generation. That is just a generation of people you can't stereotype that way. Look at who they are as an individual. As an individual with their own personality, with their own soul, with their own astrology chart. With how their synastry in astrology, with how their relationships in the synastry and their progressions and their, whatever, impact them as a person. Because it all has an impact. If you combine all the factors together, it does have an impact, a huge impact. Huge. And so, so we can't just put one person in a box and say, oh, you're this, oh, you're that, because you come from this generation. No, who they are individually. That's what we need to look at. We need to, look at the individual content of their character and their, obviously their individual astrology, who they are as an individual. So we really, really need to look at when it comes to them. With who they are, as an individual. So, you can look at the culture and events that made you into who you are currently. Because it creates who you are. And the final thing is, there's this quote, I don't know where it came from, I know that astrologer I was watching mentioned it, but the world is changing, so change along with it. Easy for me to say, I'm living in the beginning of my generation where the world is going on, but imagine what the world's going to be like 50 years from now. So, the world is changing, so move along with it. Don't be stuck in the past and how things were. And for this generation, like, things are better now. People are more free to be themselves. People are more liberated to be who they are. So embrace that. We're not living in poverty and war like that anymore. We don't have this society standards. We don't reject and squash our authenticity anymore. We're all encouraging it. So be present. Like, the present is a gift from God. Don't be so stuck in the past and project the past onto the present, onto people living in the present moment. Like you've got to be present and embrace all the positive changes that have happened since that time. So that's what I'm going to say. I hope that you enjoyed this episode of the Cosmic Sky podcast. This has been an hour and 10 minutes. Hope that you found value out of this. I hope that you found this interesting and educational for you. I will see you back on tomorrow's episode, which will be about the ascendant in the sign of Capricorn, the natal birth chart, another astrology topic. Really putting on this image of strong power, really being somebody important, being somebody conventional, being somebody very, very disciplined, certain traits of this generation. So anyway, I'm going to end it there. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.